For years, SpaceX has promised us the moon. Literally. But now for the first time, it feels like they might actually mean it. In response to NASA's growing impatience and a mounting race against China, SpaceX has quietly unveiled a bold new vision, a simplified Starship mission that could send astronauts to the lunar surface sooner than anyone thought possible. They're calling it Simplified. But make no mistake, this isn't a step back. It's a declaration of independence, a move to strip away decades of bureaucracy middlemen and outdated hardware. And here's the thing, SpaceX hasn't just come up with this overnight. They've been laying the groundwork for years, piece by piece, flight by flight, prototype by prototype. At the heart of it all is one defiant promise from Elon Musk himself. Starship will end up doing the whole moon mission. Mark my words. So, how exactly does SpaceX plan to do the whole thing? Let's break it down. But how could this actually happen? First Starship with crew on board would launch from Earth and reach orbit. There it would rendezvous with a fuel depot, which is created by multiple Starship tanker vehicles. In general, this in-orbit refueling will happen as planned. Once fully fueled, Starship would ignite its engines and begin the journey to the moon. It would enter lunar orbit, then power down for a vertical descent landing directly on the moon's surface. The crew would step out and begin their surface operations, living, working, and exploring in Starship's pressurized cabin for several days or even weeks. When it's time to come home, Starship would lift off from the lunar surface and return to Earth orbit. But here's the catch. The lunar version of Starship isn't built to survive re-entry. It has no heat shield, no wings, and adding them now would undo much of the progress already made. So instead, Starship would dock with another spacecraft already waiting in Earth orbit, a Dragon capsule. Just as Dragon automatically docks with the International Space Station today, it would use its thrusters and sensors to make a precise connection with Starship. Once the two spacecraft are securely joined, astronauts would move through the docking tunnel into Dragon, ready for the final leg home. When the transfer is complete, Dragon detaches and begins its descent. Its heat shield endures the fiery re-entry parachutes deploy, and the capsule lands safely in the ocean, completing humanity's next great leap back to the moon. When you think about it, SpaceX already has most of what it needs to pull off a moon landing entirely on its own. What's currently a massive project spread across 3 major contractors could, in theory, be reduced to just one. The Dragon spacecraft, for instance, has already proven itself through dozens of crewed and cargo missions to the International Space Station. Its systems are mature, reliable, and ready. But for this new role, Dragon could be fine-tuned even further. Upgrades might include improved docking systems to connect seamlessly with Starship and enhanced life support to handle longer missions. The concept is surprisingly simple. Instead of relying on multiple spacecraft, Orion Gateway, and others, SpaceX just needs to use 2 of its vehicles, Dragon and Starship. In addition to launching the crew with Starship, they could launch a Dragon capsule, first carrying the crew into Earth orbit. There, it would dock with Starship already waiting and fully fueled for the lunar journey. From that point forward, the 2 spacecraft would work together as a single integrated system. This approach isn't science fiction. SpaceX already has the hardware and much of the technology needed to make it happen. At the heart of this plan is docking technology. Starship's docking system is based on the same proven design used by Dragon 2, one that's been tested, qualified, and refined through years of NASA missions. It's built to connect securely with other spacecraft in orbit, including potentially Dragon itself. That means refueling, crew transfer, or even mixed spacecraft missions are all within reach. Launching Dragon to carry the crew, then having it link up with Starship in orbit, merges the best of both worlds. Dragon's reliability and operational heritage with Starship's heavy lift power and lunar landing capability. Dragon is already certified for human spaceflight to low Earth orbit. Starship, meanwhile, is being readied for deep space travel missions that go far beyond what any spacecraft has done since Apollo. It's a concept that also fits perfectly within SpaceX's larger vision of fully reusable end-to-end system that can take humans from Earth to the Moon, Mars, and beyond. If realized, this would mark a turning point, not just for Artemis, but for the future of human space exploration itself. Of course, simplification isn't just changing how the mission operates, it's transforming the design of the vehicle itself. That philosophy becomes clear the moment you look at the latest Starship human landing system renderings. The new design feels more refined, more deliberate, and unmistakably focused on function. The crew compartment now follows a cleaner, more uniform structure. The number of windows has been reduced just enough for astronauts to observe their surroundings, but not so many that they compromise safety or strength. Fewer windows mean better structural integrity, improved thermal protection, and more privacy for the crew. It's a careful balance between practicality and comfort, the kind of design thinking that defines long-duration missions in deep space. Inside, the simplification continues. The Starship HLS cabin now integrates its major systems, life support, avionics, communications, environmental controls, and crew accommodations into a single flight-ready module. This streamlined approach reduces the need for heavy modifications or add-on hardware, making the vehicle more efficient and easier to prepare for lunar flight. SpaceX is already building a Flight Article Starship HLS cabin, a real physical prototype that will be used for full-scale system tests and astronaut training. It's not just a model, it's a working unit that brings SpaceX one step closer to operational readiness. Earlier concepts showed a two-floor design compact, but often criticized for being too tight for long-term habitation. The new version changes that completely. The interior feels open and functional, with expanded workspace, dedicated living areas, and even a balcony-style observation deck offering a panoramic view through the side windows. A centrally placed staircase connects the decks, allowing astronauts to move smoothly between levels, improving efficiency and comfort during operations. Even the access systems have been simplified. The crew hatch now aligns perfectly with the lunar elevator, the platform astronauts will use to reach the surface. Its dimensions match the airlock, streamlining how astronauts and equipment move in and out of the ship. It's a smart, purposeful redesign that enhances safety and flow. But it also hints at something bigger. Seen horizontally, that same door could serve as the entryway to a future lunar habitat, a glimpse of how Starship might evolve into a permanent base on the Moon. And then, there are the landing legs, perhaps the clearest example of how simplicity and engineering can coexist. Early Starship prototypes had intricate folding leg assemblies, impressive to look at, but difficult to build and maintain. Later versions switched to fixed legs, solving some problems, but introducing others like limited flexibility for stacking or landing on uneven ground. Now SpaceX seems to have found the right balance. The latest design uses a folding mechanism inspired by the Falcon 9, proven reliable, and now adapted for the lunar environment. These legs deploy from the lower section of the ship, keeping Starship closer to the ground for better stability on rugged terrain. They may even include a spring or shock absorption system to soften landings on the Moon's unpredictable surface. It's a simple yet brilliant evolution, reducing complexity while boosting reliability. Every adjustment, every redesign brings Starship closer to one goal, making lunar missions not just possible, but practical, repeatable, and ready for the next giant leap. So now we've thought out of the box. We know what a simplified Artemis architecture could look like. But while we wait for political gears to turn, and maybe for a Trump administration to bring Jared Isaacman back into the picture to push that vision forward, it's worth asking, why is the current Artemis program such a mess in the first place? Dr. Robert Zubrin, the founder of the Mars Society, has never been shy about his opinions. And in an interview with his own organization's YouTube channel, he didn't hold back. His words were blunt. He called Artemis, quote, a mess. According to Zubrin, NASA operates in two very different modes. One is purpose-driven, the other is vendor-driven. And in his view, Apollo was absolutely the first kind. He explains that Apollo's goal wasn't primarily scientific. It was to prove a point, to show the world what free people could accomplish when united behind a common mission. Every dollar had a destination. The Saturn V, the command module, the lunar module, all parts of one seamless system engineered for one purpose: to land on the moon and bring the crew home safely. Zubrin draws a comparison to NASA's Science Mission Directorate today. He says they don't design Mars rovers just to hand out contracts to parachute or airbag companies. Each mission has a reason, a goal, a scientific outcome. It's purposeful. Every decision serves that end. But Artemis, Zubrin argues, has lost that focus. It's become what he calls vendor-driven. In other words, instead of building the right tools for the mission, NASA's current approach builds the mission around the contracts, around the politics, around the companies that need to stay funded. The result: 5 major components: SLS Orion Gateway Starship and the so-called National Lander. On paper, it sounds impressive, but in reality, these parts were never designed to function as one unified system. And too often, they simply don't fit together. Take the Gateway Station. Former NASA Administrator Charlie Bolden once proposed it instead of a lunar landing. But now it's been made mandatory. Instead of simplifying lunar missions, it adds more steps and more risk. With Gateway in the mix, a single moon mission could require as many as 14 Starship launches. Without it, only 10. Then there's the National Lander, a program born not from necessity but from disappointment. After losing the original lunar contract to SpaceX, several major aerospace players pushed NASA to fund a second lander. And NASA agreed. But there's one big problem: it runs on hydrogen and oxygen. Starship uses methane and oxygen, which means they can't even refuel each other. And finally, there's SLS. Zubrin doesn't call it a bad rocket, far from it. But he does call it outdated. Its basic design traces all the way back to 1988, nearly 30 years before it even reached the launch pad. A rocket born from another era, carrying all the weight of the past into a future that's already outpacing it. Imagine you're trying to fill a water bottle while riding a roller coaster. Both you and the bottle are moving, and spilling is likely. In space, spacecraft are zooming around Earth at 17,500 miles per hour, and transferring super cold rocket fuel, like liquid oxygen, between them is even trickier because it could evaporate or freeze if not handled perfectly. That's the challenge facing NASA's Artemis 3 mission. The plan relies on a complex in-orbit refueling system. Multiple tanker starships will launch propellant up to a fuel depot in Earth orbit, where the Starship human landing system will then top off its tanks before heading to the moon. This isn't just a neat trick. This refueling capability is absolutely essential to the Artemis architecture. Without it, Starship couldn't make the lunar round trip. However, that's not the most concerning issue raised during a Senate hearing in early September. In fact, no mission has ever refueled a spacecraft in orbit with enough fuel to go to the moon. Past space refueling tests, like NASA's 1981 Space Shuttle mission, where they transferred a small amount of fuel, were tiny compared to what's needed for a lunar trip. Meanwhile, China is pushing hard toward its own lunar mission by 2030. That adds pressure on NASA to avoid risky or unproven technologies. So, from a political standpoint, it's not hard to see why some officials would rather lean on safer, existing plans, like the Lunar Gateway Station, which fits neatly with NASA's traditional SLS rocket and Orion capsule programs. These programs already have strong industry and political backing in the U.S. aerospace world. By contrast, in-orbit refueling relies entirely on a new, unproven system, SpaceX's Starship. And as history shows, people, especially in government, tend to fear what's new, especially when time and prestige are on the line. So for now, the mood in Washington seems clear. On-orbit refueling? Too risky. Too impractical. Let's stick with what we know. But here's the real question. Is it too early to give up? Isn't it a bit ironic and honestly disheartening that the very nation that landed humans on the moon in 1969 is now hesitating to take on new frontiers while China is boldly charging ahead? It always fascinates me how quickly people label ideas as impractical just because they're new. That mindset, the fear of innovation, is the exact opposite of what got us to the moon in the first place. So, is it really too soon to say on-orbit refueling is hopeless? Because, if you look closely, there are signs of real progress and a ray of hope. In Starship's Flight 3, SpaceX successfully demonstrated cryogenic fluid transfer, moving super-cold fuel between tanks within the same vehicle while in orbit. That's a big step toward mastering the techniques needed for full-scale orbital refueling. And they're not stopping there. With the recent upgrades on Starship version 2, tested in Flights 10 and 11, SpaceX now says they're ready for something much bigger. The first full orbital refueling test using Starship version 3, planned for 2026. Here's the cool part. This test doesn't involve two different spacecraft trying to sync up like the ISS and a visiting vehicle. It's literally Starship docking with itself. According to Elon Musk, this is a much simpler problem. Because we are simply docking with ourselves, this is a much easier problem than docking with the space station, which SpaceX already does several times a year, and he's not alone in that confidence. During the World Space Business Week conference, Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, was very clear. We know we can dock 2 spacecraft. We've flown Dragon to the International Space Station dozens of times already. Indeed, SpaceX has already docked its Crew Dragon with the ISS more than 20 times since 2020. A much harder feat, because the ISS is an international collaboration with systems built by multiple countries. Every docking involves precise navigation, communication protocols, and safety checks, since astronauts are inside. By comparison, docking 2 identical starships in empty space, with no crew on board and no foreign systems to coordinate with, is far simpler. Both vehicles share the same software, design, and control systems, allowing a cleaner, more predictable connection. SpaceX has already proven it can do the hard version, so why doubt its ability to handle the easier one? Additionally, bear in mind that SpaceX has a long history of turning what once seemed impossible into reality. Back in 2014, when NASA awarded contracts under the Commercial Crew Program to develop spacecraft capable of carrying astronauts to the International Space Station, SpaceX was widely mocked by the old guard of aerospace. At the time, Boeing was considered the undisputed veteran, an industry powerhouse with decades of experience in human spaceflight. SpaceX, by contrast, looked like an upstart, a young and overly ambitious company playing in a league far above its weight. That same year, SpaceX revealed its Crew Dragon spacecraft during a flashy event at its headquarters in Hawthorne, California. Elon Musk stood on stage and said with confidence, "You'll be able to land anywhere on Earth with the accuracy of a helicopter," which is something that a modern spaceship should be able to do. This bold statement didn't sit well with everyone. John Elbin, a senior Boeing engineer overseeing its commercial space program, scoffed at SpaceX's progress. He pointed to the company's limited Falcon 9 launch rate and questioned whether it could deliver on its big promises. Referring to the Crew Dragon event, he said dismissively, "We go for substance, not pizzazz." In hindsight, Elbin's words didn't age well. Just a few years later, SpaceX made history by launching NASA astronauts aboard Crew Dragon, the first American spacecraft built and operated by a private company to carry humans into orbit. And that spacecraft was certainly not Boeing's Starliner. Since then, Crew Dragon has been flying regular missions to the ISS under NASA's contract, while Boeing's Starliner has faced repeated delays, safety concerns, and technical issues. In fact, during one of its troubled test flights, the spacecraft's system malfunctioned so severely that NASA officials later deemed it unsafe for returning astronauts. Another Crew Dragon mission had to be slightly adjusted to bring the stranded crew safely home. SpaceX didn't just beat Boeing, it defied the expectations of the entire industry. It proved that bold innovation can overcome institutional arrogance and outdated assumptions. But SpaceX's victories go far beyond just outpacing a competitor. The company has continuously shattered barriers in human spaceflight itself. In September 2021, the Crew Dragon spacecraft completed Inspiration 4, the first all-civilian orbital space mission in history. Less than a year later, in April 2022, SpaceX launched Axiom 1, the first fully private astronaut mission to the ISS. That success was followed by 3 more Axiom missions, each expanding the boundaries of commercial human spaceflight. Then came Polaris Dawn in September 2024, a private mission that achieved multiple historic firsts in just 5 days. 2 SpaceX employees flew together to orbit for the first time. The crew reached higher above Earth than any humans since the Apollo era. The mission also set a new record for the farthest distance traveled from Earth by a woman, achieved the highest number of humans in orbit simultaneously, conducted the first private spacewalk, and became the first crewed mission to use Starlink for communications. And most recently, in March 2025, SpaceX launched Fram-2, a privately funded human spaceflight led by entrepreneur Chun Wang. His all-civilian crew flew into a polar orbit, another first in human spaceflight history. From launching astronauts to pioneering all-private missions and setting orbital records, SpaceX has shown that what once seemed unrealistic can quickly become routine. If history is any guide, calling on-orbit refueling impractical might someday sound as short-sighted as doubting that a private company could build a spaceship at all. Of course, the success of the Dragon program is just one of many examples that showcase the breakthrough spirit of SpaceX. That spirit largely comes from Elon Musk himself, the driving force and soul of the company. Musk is famous for his intensity, relentless focus, competitiveness, and willingness to take on extraordinary risks. Whether it's making bold business moves like the Twitter acquisition or designing rockets and self-driving cars, with an unflinching tolerance for failure, he consistently pushes boundaries without worrying too much about the consequences. At the core of Musk's mindset lies a philosophy inspired by video games. According to Walter Isaacson's biography, Musk sees life as a kind of strategy game, one where risk, failure, and adaptation are constant. He's particularly fond of a multiplayer game called The Battle of Polytopia, where players build empires, compete for resources, and fight for survival. Musk has spent countless hours playing it, sometimes even to the point of disrupting his own schedule. But for him, the game isn't just entertainment, it's training. One of the key lessons he draws from it is simple yet profound. Don't fear of losing. You will lose, Musk said. It will hurt the first 50 times. When you get used to losing, you will play each game with less emotion. That perspective perfectly captures how he approached founding SpaceX, arguably one of the riskiest ventures in modern business history. Musk has often admitted that when he started SpaceX, he believed the chances of success were less than 10%. He fully expected to lose his entire investment. But instead of being discouraged, he accepted that possibility and moved forward anyway. His belief in humanity's future as a multiplanetary species and his passion for advancing rocket technology outweighed any fear of failure. So he chose to act, even knowing that the most likely outcome was total loss. The early years of SpaceX proved just how risky that decision was. The first few rocket launches ended in explosions, costing millions of dollars and putting the company on the brink of collapse. Public criticism was relentless. Many called Musk reckless or naive, but because he had already gotten used to losing, the emotional impact of each failure was smaller than one might expect. Instead of retreating, Musk and his team treated every explosion as data. Each failure revealed a weakness, and each weakness became an opportunity to improve. They iterated quickly, learning faster than anyone else in the industry. It was like playing a game over and over, losing often, but getting a little better each time until they finally won. Musk also applies what could be called strategic pessimism, accepting the worst possible outcome early so that fear no longer controls the decision-making process. By preparing for failure mentally, he neutralizes its emotional power. It's a kind of exposure therapy for risk. Once you accept that losing is survivable, the fear disappears, and you're free to think clearly and act boldly. That mindset, embracing failure, learning fast, and refusing to quit, has become the foundation of SpaceX's success. It's what turned impossible goals, like landing rockets or flying civilians to space, into everyday reality. You could say it all really started back in 2006 during the George W. Bush years. That's when Orion first came to life, not as part of Artemis, but as something called the Crew Exploration Vehicle under NASA's Constellation program. The plan back then was ambitious. Orion would ride into space on the massive Ares 5 rocket, kind of an early version of today's SLS, and link up with the Altair lunar lander for a return to the moon. But things didn't go quite as planned. Constellation was canceled in 2010, and yet somehow Orion survived. Why? Well, think of it this way. If you've already spent years building an elaborate Lego spaceship, would you really toss it out and start over? Probably not. You'd just keep adding cooler pieces until it's ready for the big leagues. That's basically what NASA did. Instead of shelving Orion, they reworked it to fit new rockets and new goals, namely the Artemis program, which is all about sending astronauts back to the lunar surface. It was a practical move too. By sticking with hardware that was already tested and reliable, NASA could keep costs down and speed things up. But the agency didn't just stop there, they also knew how to sell it. In NASA's words, Orion riding atop the SLS would be the ultimate combo, the next Apollo ready to carry astronauts to the moon and beyond. Officially, it's called the Multi-Purpose Crew Vehicle, designed to ferry humans everywhere from the Lunar Gateway to lunar landers. And then there's the SLS itself. NASA likes to call it the most powerful rocket ever built, the only one capable of sending Orion its crew and all their cargo directly to the moon in a single launch. So from NASA's perspective, it's the perfect match, a proven spacecraft and a powerhouse rocket built to recapture some of that old Apollo glory and maybe help the US win the space race all over again. But here's where things take a turn, and not in a good way. What started as NASA's next great moon program has quietly become one of the agency's meaningless promises. Remember when NASA said it would have astronauts back on the moon by 2020? Well, it's now 2025. Still no astronauts in Orion. Still no moon landings. And that whole low-cost, fast-to-build promise. Yeah, that aged about as well as milk in the sun. The Orion program alone has already burned through more than $30 billion. It's been in development for 19 years. To put that number into perspective, $30 billion is many times what it cost SpaceX to build Crew Dragon. It's about the same as building 2 international space stations. Or if you prefer something a little more entertaining, imagine putting 10,000 Teslas into orbit, just cruising around Earth in the world's most expensive car parade. And on a completely unrelated but funny note, that's also enough money for Elon Musk to buy Twitter again. When you combine Orion with the Space Launch System, the total cost climbs to nearly $100 billion and counting. So why so expensive? Well, part of the problem is Orion's weight. The spacecraft is heavy, which means every launch costs more, around $200 per kilogram. That's not a typo. $200,000 per kilogram. It's no wonder NASA has to scrutinize every bolt and bracket before liftoff. Take the launch abort system, for example. It's a vital safety feature, but it also weighs 7 tons, about as much as the entire Russian Soyuz spacecraft. By comparison, SpaceX's Crew Dragon tips the scales at just 12.5 tons total, making it roughly 2.5 times lighter than Orion. And the cost overruns aren't the only issue. Orion's development under Lockheed Martin has been painfully slow, dragged down by a cost-plus contract that rewards spending over speed. Meanwhile, SpaceX built and launched Crew Dragon in just 6 years, about 1/3 of Orion's timeline under a fixed-price contract. Crew Dragon isn't just faster to develop, it's also flying real missions. Its heat shield, made from SpaceX's advanced Pica X material, has proven itself time and time again. Orion, on the other hand, took a step back in time. Its heat shield uses Avcoat, a material originally designed for the Apollo capsules in the 1960s, and even with updates, it didn't perform as expected. During the Artemis 1 mission in 2022, Orion's heat shield showed signs of unexpected char loss and more than 100 chipped areas, some with deeper damage than predicted. The fixes did NASA and Lockheed Martin make fixes afterward. Ironically, they introduced new problems instead of solving old ones. At this point, you might be wondering, couldn't Lockheed Martin have just used Pica heat shield material that worked so well on other missions? The answer is yes, and that's what makes this even more puzzling. Lockheed Martin already built a Pica heat shield for NASA's Mars rovers Curiosity and Perseverance, and both of those handled fiery Martian entries without a hitch. But for some reason, when it came to Orion, the capsule meant to carry human lives. They went with Avcoat, an older and less capable design. Meanwhile, SpaceX's Crew Dragon keeps doing its job like a reliable worker bee, launching astronauts to the ISS and bringing them home safely. Orion, on the other hand, keeps running into technical problems. Tests have revealed unexpected erosion on the bolts that connect Orion to its European service module. Even the side hatch, the door astronauts use before launch and after landing, turned out to be a hassle. Why? Because it doesn't have a pressure equalization valve, meaning it can be nearly impossible to open when there's a pressure difference between the inside and outside of the capsule. By now you might be thinking, is there any truth to what NASA has been saying about Orion and the SLS based on what's actually happening with Artemis? That's a tough case to make. NASA claims that the SLS and Orion together can send astronauts straight to the moon in a single launch. On paper, that sounds great. The bigger and more powerful the rocket, the easier it should be to send a lightweight spacecraft farther. That's rocket science 101. But in practice, that's not what's happening. The SLS Block 1, the current version of the rocket, can carry about 27 metric tons to lunar orbit. Sounds like a lot, until you remember that Orion, including its launch abort system, weighs over 33 metric tons. That's heavier than what the rocket was really designed to handle. As a result, The SLS has to operate right at the edge of its limits. Sure, some might say, didn't NASA already prove it works? Artemis 1 launched successfully, didn't it? Yes, it did. But that mission pushed the system close to its maximum capability. It worked, but there wasn't much room for error. NASA knows this too. That's why future Artemis missions starting after Artemis 3 will rely on upgraded versions of the rocket Block 1B and eventually Block 2 with more powerful boosters and improved upper stages. These versions are supposed to carry heavier payloads and larger crews farther into space. But here's the real question. If the current program is already drowning in cost overruns and delays, what's going to happen when NASA starts building bigger rockets? Will history repeat itself? And if Orion is already showing cracks in performance cost and design, what if there's already a better alternative waiting in the wings? That's where SpaceX Crew Dragon comes in. Even with upgrades for deep space missions, Dragon would still come in far lighter than NASA's Orion, a perfect example of how far spacecraft design has evolved. Orion's blueprint dates back to Apollo era thinking big heavy and built with layers of complexity. Dragon, on the other hand, represents a new era of engineering. It uses fewer parts, is reusable, uses advanced materials, and has streamlined systems integration. The result, a spacecraft that's lighter, cheaper, and faster to build and fly. Now, to be fair, Orion was designed for longer lunar missions. It carries robust life support systems and extra radiation shielding features that make sense for deep space, but also add tons of weight. Dragon, in contrast, was optimized for short trips to the ISS in low Earth orbit. But here's the interesting part. SpaceX has worked on variants of Dragon that could go farther under NASA's own contracts. That alone shows NASA knows SpaceX has the potential to develop a deep space crew vehicle, one that's lighter, more efficient, and far less expensive than Orion. And if anyone's going to pull it off, it's probably SpaceX. This is the company that decided to catch rockets out of the sky with a pair of giant robotic chopsticks and actually made progress doing it. The company that's aiming for fully reusable rockets, the kind that take off and land like airplanes, is completely rewriting the rules of rocketry. These are things that even NASA's most seasoned engineers once considered impossible. But SpaceX is already turning them into reality. If that future comes true, one possible scenario looks like this: astronauts could ride Crew Dragon from Earth to low orbit, then transfer to the HLS for the trip down to the Moon's surface. NASA could even open bids to adapt Dragon or Boeing's Starliner with better propulsion and life support for deep space missions. And let's be honest, Crew Dragon would probably win. It's cheaper proven and has flown far more astronauts than Orion ever has. Supporters of NASA's existing programs, like Orion and the SLS, both led by Boeing and Lockheed Martin, have their own counterarguments. They point out that SLS works and Orion works. In fact, Orion has already flown around the Moon and safely returned to Earth. The spacecraft isn't an early test article or a pre-prototype, as some critics claim. It's a fully functional vehicle. The version that flew on Artemis 1 was nearly identical to the crewed model, with one key exception. The life support system wasn't installed, simply because it wasn't needed for that mission. So what about you, Orion or Dragon? Which one do you think will really take NASA back to the Moon? Let me know down in the comments below. It's easy to understand why the space community once adored Sierra Space's Dream Chaser. When it was first introduced, the vehicle seemed like a bridge between the space shuttle's legacy and a new era of reusable commercial spacecraft. Dream Chaser was designed as an autonomous reusable spaceplane that could launch vertically atop a rocket and land horizontally on any standard runway. The appeal was obvious: quick access to cargo after landing, shorter turnaround times between missions, and no need for complex ocean recoveries like those required for capsules. For many, Dream Chaser represented the elegant future of space travel. The origins of Dream Chaser trace back to NASA's HL-20 concept from the 1990s, a lifting body design meant for crew transport to low Earth orbit. In the early 2000s, the idea was revived with the hope of turning NASA's concept into a real operational vehicle. After falling into the hands of Sierra Nevada Corporation, this project was proposed for the Commercial Crew Program and even received some seed money from NASA under the Commercial Crew Development Program, Phases 1 and 2, as well as the Commercial Crew Integrated Capability Phase. Each stage brought Dream Chaser closer to flight readiness. But when NASA made its final selection in 2014, Dream Chaser lost out to SpaceX's Crew Dragon and Boeing's Starliner. The decision wasn't just about money, it reflected maturity and risk. Capsules like Dragon and Starliner had simpler proven designs, while Dream Chaser's winged concept, though innovative, still needed extensive development. Still, Sierra Nevada didn't walk away empty-handed. The company was later selected for NASA's Commercial Resupply Services 2 contract, which guaranteed a minimum of 7 cargo flights to the ISS. Unlike the crew version, this cargo variant wouldn't carry astronauts, but it kept the dream alive. At the time, optimism ran high. In 2017, Sierra Space successfully conducted an approach and landing test using an engineering prototype proving that the spaceplane could glide and land safely on a runway. The test fueled excitement about a future where sleek commercial spaceplanes might routinely ferry supplies between Earth and orbit. However, aerospace history is full of ambitious vehicles slowed by real-world challenges. Dream Chaser's first cargo mission, originally planned for 2021, was delayed year after year, moving to 2022, 2023, 2024, and then 2025. The delays hinted at deep technical and logistical problems. When the first flight-ready vehicle, Dream Chaser Tenacity, arrived at Kennedy Space Center in May 2024, hopes rose again for an imminent launch. But then came silence. At press events, NASA gave few details about the schedule, and rumors began circulating about certification issues. By September 2025, NASA confirmed that the agency was removing its obligation for 7 guaranteed flights, stating it was no longer obligated for a specific number of resupply missions. The decision was part of a mutual contract amendment, but was widely viewed as a major setback for Sierra Space. As predicted, the problems centered on vehicle certification. NASA potentially could have been concerned that Sierra wouldn't have all the required certifications in time for a flight in the near future, especially since ISS is scheduled to be retired in 2030. In August, the National Space Agency stated that Sierra Space was in the final phase of certification, but was still stuck in 2 key areas: software and propulsion systems. NASA has demanded rigorous end-to-end software testing before allowing any new spacecraft to approach the ISS. Its caution was understandable. The troubled first flight of Boeing's Starliner had revealed how software flaws could jeopardize missions. Dream Chaser's propulsion system added another layer of complexity. The vehicle uses a hybrid system combining kerosene and hydrogen peroxide, a cleaner, less toxic propellant compared to hydrazine. While safer, it requires extensive testing and validation from scratch. Additional integrated safety reviews also had to be completed before flight clearance. Complicating matters further was the launch schedule for United Launch Alliance's Vulcan Centaur rocket, the vehicle tasked with carrying Dream Chaser to orbit. The Vulcan itself faced multiple delays, leaving limited windows for Sierra Space to launch. Given these challenges, NASA and Sierra Space agreed on a compromise. Instead of docking with the ISS on its first mission, Dream Chaser's debut would be a free flight demonstration. In this mission, Tenacity will launch into orbit, test its propulsion guidance, re-entry, and runway landing, but without connecting to the ISS. It will still operate close enough to validate its systems in realistic conditions. This approach reduces risk and gives Sierra Space time to gather valuable data. The test flight is now scheduled for no earlier than late 2026. While this change improved the margin of safety, it created serious negative impacts on Sierra itself. First of all, financial stress. The original CRS-2 contract, valued at roughly $628 million per mission, promised Sierra Space up to 7 launches. The total potential value exceeded $4 billion, representing a stable income source to fund Dream Chaser's development and operations. Without these guaranteed flights, Sierra Space faces a sharp drop in expected revenue, potentially losing hundreds of millions to billions of dollars over time. The lack of predictable income could make it harder to raise investment capital or expand production. NASA's decision to provide only minimal support during the demonstration flight means Sierra Space must shoulder much of the cost itself. This increases financial risk and delays any return on years of investment. Even if Dream Chaser's free flight mission succeeds, its window for ISS operations is closing fast. The ISS is scheduled for retirement around 2030, giving only a few years for potential resupply missions. NASA's other cargo providers, SpaceX's Dragon and Northrop Grumman's Cygnus, already perform regular, reliable flights. Unless NASA adds more missions, Dream Chaser may find itself competing for fewer and fewer opportunities. In essence, Dream Chaser must now prove it deserves a place in a market that no longer urgently needs it. The news of NASA scaling back its commitment sparked disappointment within the space community. Many space enthusiasts had followed Dream Chaser's progress for years, rooting for its success as a distinctive alternative to capsules. Hopefully, future NASA budgets will be prioritized to contractors who can actually deliver on time with reliable and cost-effective technology. Oh man, what a bummer I was, so hoping to see Dream Chaser become an operational spacecraft. I hope SpaceX buys out Sierra. That Dream Chaser is awesome. SpaceX could finish the job. On the other hand, some expressed sympathy for the challenges Sierra Space is facing. Might also be partly due to schedule conflicts with other cargo services and the uncertainty of Dream Chaser's maiden launch date holding up resupply missions. It's not the same as needing a backup to crew access, either, as with Starliner, since Cargo Dragon and Cygnus are both flying. Already, Dream Chaser is more nice to have. It's unfortunate though, maybe after the free flight, they can finally nail down whatever problems they have and do a proper flight to the ISS. I'm surprised so few have mentioned it, but Dream Chaser was supposed to work with the Vulcan Centaur, which saw a delay as well. I'm guessing the delay on the Vulcan had downstream effects on the schedule for Dream Chaser. Others point out that Sierra Space's difficulties also reflect the inherent complexity of developing a winged spacecraft. Capsule designs like Dragon are relatively simple, compact, robust, and proven. They rely on parachutes for descent and splashdown safely at sea. By contrast, a spaceplane must survive high-speed re-entry, maintain aerodynamic stability, and land precisely on a runway. The company is expanding its focus beyond NASA contracts and the ISS. Its broader goal is to become a key player in the emerging commercial space economy, one that includes private space stations, national defense missions, and orbital logistics. At the center of that strategy is Orbital Reef, a proposed commercial space station being developed by Sierra Space Blue Origin Boeing and several partners. Designed as a mixed-use orbital hub for research, manufacturing, and tourism, Orbital Reef aims to host up to 10 occupants initially, with room to grow. Sierra Space is responsible for providing its inflatable habitats and plans to use Dream Chaser to deliver cargo and possibly crew to the station. The project targets operational readiness between 2027 and 2030, potentially just as the ISS retires. This diversification could help Sierra Space reduce its dependence on NASA and tap into a broader market that includes commercial research, private industry, and government customers. Another key focus for Sierra Space is national security. The U.S. Space Force and Defense Innovation Unit have both shown interest in Dream Chaser's capabilities, particularly its ability to launch, quickly operate autonomously, and land on standard runways for rapid turnaround. In a statement posted on social media in September, Sierra Space emphasized this flexibility. Dream Chaser's first flight will be a free-flyer demonstration mission designed to prove our technology and deliver critical data to NASA. We believe this approach will give us the flexibility to address pressing national security space challenges while continuing to advance Dream Chaser for NASA and commercial customers. The U.S. defense sector represents a lucrative opportunity. The 2025 defense budget request for the Space Force exceeds $217 billion, much of it allocated to space-based surveillance communications and logistics. Dream Chaser's reusable runway landing design could play a role in future defense and intelligence missions that require quick orbital access and retrieval. Sierra Space is already collaborating with the Defense Innovation Unit to explore using Dream Chaser's Shooting Star cargo module for orbital outposts and uncrewed missions. These efforts highlight the vehicle's versatility beyond ISS operations, potentially supporting national defense emergency logistics and rapid response missions in low Earth orbit. You might already know that China's Tiangong space station came together in just 18 months, with about a dozen launches marking its main construction phase. Much like the International Space Station, Tiangong was built using a modular approach, with sections assembled while orbiting Earth. The first piece, the Tianhe Core module, lifted off on April 29, 2021. After that came a series of crewed and uncrewed missions, leading to the addition of 2 lab modules. The first, Wentian, meaning Quest for the Heavens, launched on July 24, 2022, followed by Mengtian, or Dreaming of the Heavens, on October 31, 2022. Both modules docked automatically and were repositioned in orbit to form the station's final T-shaped layout. Each module was largely pre-assembled on Earth and engineered for automatic docking, minimizing the need for spacewalks or manual work in orbit. This method of sending up larger, ready-to-connect components saved enormous amounts of time. It's quite different from how the ISS was built, where astronauts had to manually connect even smallest pieces in space, wiring, pipes, and framework, one step at a time. You could think of the ISS as a massive space puzzle built by many nations, piece by piece, while Tiangong was more like snapping together large, ready-made sections in space. As a result, the ISS took far longer to complete, up to 13 years, beginning its assembly in 1998 and requiring more than 30 launches. This wasn't just because of a different assembly method. Tiangong is also much smaller. It consists of 3 main modules, while the ISS is made up of 16, making it about 5 times larger overall. Despite that, the inside of Tiangong feels surprisingly open and spacious, with a clean, minimalist look. What's fascinating is that both stations share nearly the same module diameter, about 4.2 meters or 14 feet. But Tiangong's layout offers noticeably more usable space inside. That difference comes down to a few key design choices. The ISS modules tend to be shorter and have more connecting joints, which create narrow passageways throughout the structure. Tiangong, on the other hand, uses longer, more streamlined sections. For example, the Destiny Lab on the ISS, the main workspace for U.S. astronauts, is about 8.4 meters, or 28 feet long. In contrast, both the Wentian and Mengtian modules on Tiangong stretch to 18 meters, or roughly 59 feet each, making the Chinese station feel far more open and continuous inside. Secondly, the technology on Tiangong is far more modern, featuring fewer cables and less clutter, which allows everything to fit neatly into smaller spaces. Many of the station's systems connect wirelessly, avoiding the maze of wiring that runs throughout the ISS. A lot of the hardware is also hidden behind sleek white panels when not in use, giving Tiangong a clean, minimalist look that almost feels inspired by Apple's design philosophy. Another big difference is how the station's interior is organized. Tiangong is optimized for experiments and storage rather than living space. For instance, the Mengtian module alone offers about 32 cubic meters dedicated to research, complete with a special airlock that lets astronauts move equipment and samples in and out without depressurizing the whole cabin, making experiments much easier and safer. Because of that, Mengtian doesn't include sleeping quarters. By contrast, some areas of the ISS combine work and living space. Astronauts sleep in small pods built right into the lab modules, which takes up valuable room that could otherwise be used for equipment. Add in the older wiring systems and narrower passages from its piece-by-piece construction, and the ISS naturally feels a bit more crowded than the sleek, open design of Tiangong. At this point, you might be wondering, where do Chinese astronauts, or taikonauts, actually sleep? The answer lies inside the Tianhe core module. Each crew member has their own private sleeping space, roughly the size of a twin bed with some extra headroom. These bunks are noticeably larger and more comfortable than the compact sleeping pods found on the ISS. The quarters aboard Tiangong are designed to feel cozy and personal, with enough room for items like photos, manuals, and headphones. Each astronaut even has their own window for gazing out into space. This thoughtful setup offers both privacy and a touch of home, which is crucial for maintaining mental health and good rest during long missions. It's clear that modern space stations are paying more attention to the comfort and well-being of their crews. This trend fits perfectly with the growing push toward the commercialization of space travel, where future visitors to orbit may include not just government astronauts, but also private researchers and even space tourists. China clearly wants its taikonauts to feel as close to life on Earth as possible, which is why the Tiangong station features footholds mounted to the floor. These help astronauts stay in place while eating, posing for group photos, or even snapping a quick selfie in microgravity. Speaking of meals, it's reassuring to know that the crew can grow fresh lettuce and other vegetables on board, along with receiving regular shipments of fruit like apples. This goes a long way in addressing the vitamin deficiencies that often affect astronauts during long stays in space. And when it comes to dining, Tiangong takes a big leap forward. Freeze-dried or vacuum-sealed meals are no longer the dreaded routine they used to be, thanks to a microwave designed specifically for space. Traditional microwaves can't be used on the ISS due to their high power demands and safety risks. Instead, ISS astronauts rely on warmers that use heated water to slowly bring meals up to temperature. Chinese engineers, however, became the first to successfully develop a fully functional space microwave. It took them over a decade to perfect a design that's lightweight, energy-efficient, and capable of surviving the intense vibrations of a Long March 5B rocket launch. The results speak for themselves. While astronauts on the ISS wait 20 to 30 minutes to heat their food, taikonauts aboard Tiangong can prepare a full meal for 3 people in just 7 minutes. Here's a fun question. Have you ever wondered what's on the menu for Chinese astronauts? Given the richness of Chinese cuisine, it's safe to say their meals are anything but boring. In fact, during a stay aboard Tiangong, the crew can choose from as many as 120 different dishes. We're talking about classics like shredded pork in garlic sauce, kung pao chicken, black pepper beef, and pickled cabbage with pork, just to name a few. Honestly, just listing them makes my mouth water. Does it do the same for you? Please comment below about your feelings. If you've never tried authentic Chinese food, you definitely should. It's an experience you won't regret. When the Tianzhou 2 cargo ship launched on May 29, 2021, it carried about 6.8 tons of supplies, including a wide variety of food and drinks. There were teas, juices, soups, and even coolers packed with fresh fruits and vegetables to keep everything crisp in orbit. The meals themselves are designed to be easy to handle in microgravity, solid, boneless, and bite-sized, while still catering to each astronaut's personal tastes. To make up for the reduced sense of taste in space, taikonauts also bring along flavorful condiments like pork sauce and Sichuan pepper sauce to spice things up. Eating and sleeping are basic human needs, no matter where we live, even 400 kilometers above Earth. What's truly fascinating is how Chinese astronauts aboard Tiangong maintain a routine that closely mirrors life back home. Their workday usually begins at 8 a.m. Beijing time, with the afternoon shift starting around 2 p.m. Unless unexpected tasks arise, mornings are typically devoted to maintenance checks and equipment testing, while afternoons focus on research. The daily experiments cover a wide range of topics, from growing crops and studying human physiology in space to exploring materials, science, and deep space observation. All of this helps scientists learn more about how humans can live and work in space long-term. By December 2024, Tiangong had already completed 181 scientific and applied research projects in orbit. Over the next 10 to 15 years, China plans to conduct more than 1,000 additional experiments aboard the station. As for their evenings, dinner is usually served around 6 p.m. and lasts about an hour. Afterward, the crew often tunes in to Xinwen Lianbo, China's most watched daily news program. The ground support team regularly transmits news broadcasts and updates to the taikonauts, helping them stay connected with life and events back on Earth. Working out is one of the top priorities for astronauts in space, and the taikonauts are no exception. They have access to specially designed workout equipment, including a bicycle and a treadmill. Exercise is part of their daily routine, and each astronaut follows a personalized fitness plan. Typically, they train at 60 to 80% of their maximum capacity, gradually increasing intensity over time to counter the effects of weightlessness on their muscles and bones. We've already covered what happens inside the station, so now let's step outside, literally, for spacewalks. Tiangong is equipped with 3 Chinese EVA suits, stored in the airlock of the Wentian module. The station also features 2 robotic arms, a 10-meter arm on the Tianhe core module and a smaller 5-meter arm on Wentian. These can link together to form a single 15-meter arm, giving astronauts impressive flexibility and reach. This combined arm rivals the 17-meter-long Canadarm2 used on the ISS and has already proven invaluable for assisting taikonauts during spacewalks, such as installing handrails between modules. Spacewalks on Tiangong usually last several hours and are crucial for tasks like installing debris shields, inspecting and repairing solar panels, maintaining external equipment, and mounting scientific instruments. The robotic arms play a key role in these missions, stabilizing astronauts, moving gear, and positioning them in hard-to-reach areas outside the station. China's ambition doesn't stop there. They are looking to expand their capabilities with new modules and spacecraft. The upgrades to Tiangong will come in a number of steps. The first would be to update the Chinese space station's Tianhe core module to be able to accept further modules. With this purpose, they try to upgrade the space station from its current T-shape to the future cross shape, or you may also call it the double T-shape. This would allow China to send more space science experiment racks and large extravehicular experiments, and overall extend the scale of operations aboard Tiangong. Another upgrade is developing the renewable spaceship. The versatile spacecraft named Mengzhou will come in two variants, one for sending crew to the Moon and another for Tiangong. With this spaceship, they can support 3 astronauts for the lunar missions and also the 7 astronauts for the new space station missions.